In 2013, the Minister of Culture of Russia went on the record and insisted that one of the most famous composers who ever lived was not gay. He said there was no evidence. He was wrong, and on some level he had to know it, because the evidence had been sitting in a Russian archive for decades, deliberately censored. Letters in the composer's own hand, describing his love for other men, quietly locked away so the official story could stay clean. That composer is number 1 on today's list. But here is the thing that should make you angry. He is not the exception. He is the rule. The history of music is full of men who loved other men and then had that love carefully scrubbed out of the program notes, the biographies, and the textbooks. Welcome to the Closet Chronicles, where we drag the story's history tried to bury back into the daylight. Today, 12 composers who loved men. From the gilded court of the Sun King to the concert halls of the 20th century, these are men whose music you have almost certainly heard, even if no one ever told you the truth about who they were. And as always, I'm going to be honest with you about the evidence. Where it is rock solid, I will say so. Where scholars are genuinely still arguing, I will say that too, because the truth is more interesting than the propaganda. We are counting up to the most famous of them all. Let us begin. Number 12. Franz Schubert. I am opening with the most argued over name on this entire list, on purpose, because it tells you exactly how this channel works. In 1989, a respected musicologist named Maynard published a study suggesting that Franz Schubert, the great Viennese composer of more than 600 songs, was attracted to men. He pointed to Schubert's circle of intense male friendships, his lack of documented relationships with women, the bohemian all-male world he lived in, and some suggestive phrases in his letters. And then the fight began. Other scholars, most notably Rita Steblin, pushed back hard, arguing that Solomon had misread and mistranslated his evidence. To this day, historians are genuinely divided. So, I'm not going to stand here and tell you Schubert was definitely gay, because honestly, we do not know. What I can tell you is that the mere suggestion caused an uproar in the classical music world, and that the fury itself revealed something ugly about how desperately some people needed him to be straight. Schubert is here as a question mark, openly. That is the honest answer, and you deserve the honest answer. Number 11. George Friedrich Handel. The man who wrote Messiah, the oratorio whose Hallelujah chorus you have heard 1,000 times, is another genuine question mark, and another honest entry. Handel never married. There is no record of any significant romantic relationship with a woman, or with a man for that matter. He kept his private life almost completely sealed, but the case is not nothing. The music scholar Ellen Harris wrote an entire book, Handel as Orpheus, arguing that a whole body of his private cantatas carries an unmistakable homoerotic charge, written for and about love between men, in the circles of wealthy patrons where such things were quietly understood. Handel moved comfortably through worlds in Italy and London, where same-sex desire was an open secret among the elite, protected by money and status. He guarded his privacy so fiercely that even now, 3 centuries later, we are left reading between the lines of his music rather than his letters. So again, I am not going to overclaim. We cannot prove it, but the composer of the most famous sacred music in the English language may very well have been a gay man. And serious scholars now argue exactly that, in print, with the receipts. Number 10. Jean-Baptiste Lully. Now we move from question marks to documented fact, and we go to the glittering court of Louis XIV, the Sun King. Jean-Baptiste Lully essentially invented French opera and ran the musical life of the most powerful court in Europe. He was also one of the king's few true personal friends. And he was, by the open knowledge of his own time, a man who loved men. Lully married a woman and had children, the expected cover, but he made very little effort to hide his real life, and in 1685 it caught up with him. He was caught in an affair with a young man named Brunet, a music page living in his own household. The scandal exploded. Satirical poems mocking him circulated all the way to Italy. The king, who by then had fallen under intense religious pressure to clean up his court, could not be seen to protect him, and Lully was pushed out of royal favor. 2 years later, he was dead. The man who built the sound of the Sun King's court was brought down, in the end, for loving another man. Number 9. Francis Poulenc. Francis Poulenc was one of the most important French composers of the 20th century. A man who could write sparkling, witty piano music and then turn around and write some of the most profound, sacred music of his era. Friends nicknamed him, half affectionately, the monk and the rascal, because he contained both. And Poulenc was gay. This was known in his circle and is well documented today. He had a series of relationships with men across his life, some of them deeply serious, and the grief and longing from those relationships fed directly into his music. When one of his great loves died, the loss poured into some of the most aching music he ever wrote, including his sacred works, where private heartbreak and religious devotion became almost impossible to separate. He did not make grand public declarations because the times did not allow it, but he did not invent a fake marriage to hide behind either. He simply lived, loved men, and poured all of it into some of the most beautiful music France produced in the last century. Number 8. Karol Szymanowski. If you are not Polish, you may not know this name, and that is exactly the kind of erasure this channel exists to fix, because in Poland, Karol Szymanowski is considered the greatest composer since Chopin, and he was openly, unmistakably gay, at a time and place where that took real nerve. Szymanowski did not just quietly live his life. He wrote a sprawling 2-volume novel called Ephebos that took love between men as its subject. He wrote an opera, King Roger, in which a Sicilian king becomes consumed by his attraction to a beautiful young shepherd. His friend, the famous pianist Arthur Rubinstein, recalled Szymanowski returning from Sicily aflame, talking openly about the young men he had seen there. This was a man who built his art around his desire instead of hiding it, and to this day, in his deeply Catholic homeland, that part of him is the part most often left politely unmentioned. Number 7. Ned Rorem. Most of the men on this list had their truth dug out by later historians. Ned Rorem did something almost unheard of for his generation. He told it himself, in print, while it could still ruin him. Rorem was a celebrated American composer who won the Pulitzer Prize for his music, but he became just as famous, and to some people infamous, for publishing his diaries, beginning in the 1960s. In them, he wrote frankly about his life as a gay man, his romances, the parties, the famous figures he had known and slept with, all of it, in an era when that kind of honesty was genuinely dangerous and could have ended everything. Some critics clutched their pearls and dismissed him as a scandal monger. But what Rorem had actually done was refuse the closet in public, on the page, in black and white, decades before it was remotely safe to do so. He did not wait for history to out him. He beat history to it, and he did it in his own elegant prose. Number 6. Cole Porter. You know his songs, even if you do not know you know them, night and day. Anything goes. I get a kick out of you. Cole Porter was one of the greatest songwriters America ever produced. The king of sophisticated, witty, impossibly elegant popular song. And behind the glamour, his real romantic life was with men. Porter was married to a woman named Linda, in what was by most accounts a genuine and loving partnership. But one both of them understood was not built on physical desire. She knew exactly who he was. Throughout their marriage, Porter pursued relationships and affairs with men, conducted with the same discretion that wealth and fame could buy in his era. The polished, knowing double meanings in so many of his lyrics were not an accident. This was a gay man writing the soundtrack of high society America, hiding his truth in plain sight, in plain song. Number 5. Samuel Barber and Giancarlo Menotti. You have almost certainly heard Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings. It is the piece of music the world reaches for in moments of collective grief, the sound of mourning itself. and the man who wrote it spent most of his life with another composer, Giancarlo Menotti, as his partner. They met as young students at the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, and they were together as creative partners and as a couple for decades. They even bought a house together with a name that became famous in music circles, where they both composed. Unlike many on this list, Barber and Menotti made comparatively little effort to disguise the nature of their bond. Two Pulitzer Prize winners, building a shared life and a shared body of work. In love. The next time you hear that adagio swell, remember it was written by a man who loved another man and never pretended otherwise to the people who mattered. Number 4. Aaron Copland. If any single piece of music sounds like America itself, the wide open prairie, the big sky, the fanfare, it was probably written by Aaron Copland. Appalachian Spring, Fanfare for the Common Man, Rodeo. He is, more than anyone, the man who composed the sound of the United States. And he was a gay man his entire life. Copland was discreet, because he had to be. He came up in an era when being exposed could end a career, and during the anti-communist witch hunts of the 1950s, he was actually hauled in front of a Senate committee, his patriotism and his life put under suspicion. And yet, within his own world, Copland never really hid. He had relationships with younger men, several of them artists themselves, and the people close to him simply knew. The man who gave America its musical self-portrait was someone that same country would have prosecuted for who he loved. Sit with that contradiction for a second. Number 3. Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein was a supernova, the composer of West Side Story, the conductor who made classical music feel electric on national television, one of the most charismatic musicians of the entire 20th century, and his attraction to men was a powerful, lifelong current that ran right through that dazzling public life. Now, I want to be precise, because precision is the point. Bernstein was married to the actress Felicia Montealegre. He loved her, and they had 3 children. By the honest evidence, he was a bisexual man, not a gay man living a total lie, and the distinction matters. But his relationships with men were real, serious, and numerous, and in his later years they became increasingly open. He once reportedly said that to express himself fully, he could not live as anything other than who he truly was. The maestro the whole world watched was, in private, a far more complicated and a far braver figure than the cameras ever showed. Number 2. Benjamin Britten and Peter Pears. Benjamin Britten was the most important British composer of the 20th century, the man who almost single-handedly revived English opera, and the love of his life was the tenor Peter Pears. They were together for around 40 years, as partners in music and partners in everything else, until Britten's death. And here's what makes this one land so hard. For almost the entire span of their relationship, sex between men was a criminal offense in Britain. They could have been arrested, they built a life, a home, and an entire music festival together anyway, in open secrecy that everyone around them understood. Britten wrote some of his greatest roles for Pears' voice, including the haunted outsider at the center of his opera Peter Grimes, a work absolutely soaked in the pain of being a man who does not fit the world's rules. They are buried side by side. 2 men, 4 decades, one of the great love stories in the history of music, lived out entirely under threat of prison. And that brings us back to where we began. Number 1. Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. Swan Lake, The Nutcracker, the 6th Symphony. Some of the most beloved music ever written by anyone, anywhere. And its composer was a gay man whose own country has spent more than a century trying to erase that fact. We are not guessing here. Tchaikovsky's homosexuality is documented in his own letters and diaries, and in the letters of his brother Modest, who was also gay and who lived openly with his partner. Tchaikovsky wrote about his attractions to men with surprising candor to the people he trusted. He was pressured into a catastrophic marriage to a female admirer that collapsed within weeks and nearly destroyed him. And the great love of his final years appears to have been his own young nephew, to whom he dedicated that heartbreaking Sixth Symphony, the Pathétique, just before his sudden death. And what did history do with all of this? It hid it. Soviet censors locked away the revealing passages of his letters for generations. As recently as the last decade, a Russian government minister stood up and flatly denied the truth, calling Tchaikovsky simply a lonely old bachelor who never found the right woman. The evidence was right there, in the archive, in his own handwriting. They just did not want you to read it. That is why this channel exists. Not to invent anything, not to wave a flag, but to refuse the erasure. To say simply, here's what the man actually wrote, here's who he actually loved, and you can decide what it means. 12 composers. 2 of them honest question marks, 10 of them documented, all of them real, and nearly every one of them handed down to us with the truest part of their hearts quietly edited out. We are putting it back. If one of these surprised you, tell me which one in the comments because I read them. And if you want more of the history they tried to keep in the closet, you know what to do. I will see you in the next one.